There is a force shaping your life that almost no one pays attention to. It's not your motivation, it's not your discipline, it's not even your circumstances. It's something quieter, something that operates long before you make a decision, long before you act, long before you explain anything to yourself. It's the identity you're operating from, not the one you talk about, not the one you show online, but the one you feel to be true when no one is watching. Most people believe their lives repeat because of bad luck, or timing, or external limitations. But repetition doesn't come from the outside. It comes from a deeper place, from an internal position that keeps selecting the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same interpretations, over and over again. You don't experience life as it is. You experience life as you are. And that's uncomfortable to hear, because it means that what keeps showing up in your life isn't random. It's familiar. Familiar to the version of you that keeps waking up every day, unconsciously asking the same silent question. Who am I in this situation? You may think you're choosing freely, but most of your choices are already decided before you're aware of them. By the way you interpret things, by what you expect, by what feels natural to you. That's why two people can face the same situation and live completely different realities. Same opportunity, same environment, same moment, different internal identities. One moves forward, the other hesitates. One speaks, the other stays silent. One sees possibility, the other sees risk. Not because one is smarter or stronger, but because they are identified with different versions of themselves. Here's the part almost no one tells you. You don't repeat patterns because you want to. You repeat them because they confirm who you believe you are. The mind seeks consistency, not happiness. If your identity is built around struggle, ease will feel suspicious. If your identity is built around waiting, action will feel premature. If your identity is built around being overlooked, visibility will feel unsafe. So even when something new appears, something better, something different, you subtly step away from it. Not consciously, not deliberately, automatically. This is why so many people say they want change, but quietly sabotage it the moment it gets close. Change threatens identity, and the brain's primary job is to protect identity, not to improve your life. That's why self-help often fails. It tries to change behavior without touching identification. It tries to add habits on top of a self that was never questioned. You can wake up earlier. You can read more books. You can try harder. But if the underlying identity remains the same, your life will slowly bend back into familiar shapes. Different details, same pattern. This is what people mean when they say life feels like it's on repeat. Same emotional cycles, same relational dynamics, same internal conversations, different year, same self. And the most dangerous part, it feels normal because you don't notice identity the way you notice events. Identity is invisible. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply decides what feels possible, what feels allowed, and what feels not for you. You don't say, I'm not the kind of person this works out for. You feel it. You don't say, I'm identified with limitation. You hesitate. You delay. You overthink. And then you explain it later with logic. This is why awareness matters more than effort. Before discipline, before goals, before strategy. There has to be a moment where you step back and see something clearly. Your life is not reacting to what you want. It is responding to who you believe you are, not consciously, but consistently. Once you see that, something shifts, not externally, internally. You stop asking, how do I change my life? And you begin asking a far more powerful question. What version of myself am I living from without realizing it? That question is uncomfortable, but it's the beginning of everything. Because the moment you become aware of the identity behind your patterns, you're no longer completely controlled by it. You don't fix it yet. You don't change it yet. You simply see it. And seeing it is the first real interruption in the loop. From here on, the conversation changes, because the force behind everything you experience is no longer invisible. And once it's no longer invisible, it no longer has total control. Here's something most people never notice. Your life is not shaped by what happens to you. It's shaped by what holds your attention. Attention is not neutral, it's selective, and whatever it selects, it strengthens. Your brain is constantly filtering reality. At every second, it decides what matters and what doesn't, what to amplify, what to ignore. You think you see the world clearly, but you don't see reality as it is. You see reality through the lens of what you're identified with. Attention follows identity. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, your attention will naturally search for obstacles. If you see yourself as someone who must be careful, your attention will scan for danger. If you see yourself as someone who is behind in life, your attention will constantly compare. Not because you choose to, but because it feels automatic. The brain loves efficiency. Once it learns a pattern, it keeps repeating it. This is why two people can live in the same environment and experience completely different lives. One notices opportunity, the other notices threat. One notices growth, the other notices confirmation of limitation. Same world, different attention. And attention is trained over time. Every time you focus on a problem, your brain becomes better at finding problems. Every time you rehearse a worry, your mind learns that worry is important. Every time you replay a memory, you reinforce the identity connected to it. Eventually, attention becomes habit. Habit becomes perception. Perception becomes reality. This is how life starts repeating itself without you realizing why. You don't wake up and decide to relive the same emotional patterns. Your attention simply returns to familiar territory. What feels familiar feels safe, even if it hurts. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths about the human mind. The brain prefers the familiar over the beneficial. If chaos is familiar, calm will feel boring. If disappointment is familiar, hope will feel unrealistic. If waiting is familiar, movement will feel reckless. So when something new appears, something that doesn't match your internal identity, your attention doesn't lock onto it. It slides past. You might even say things like, "That's not for me. That won't last. That works for other people." But what's really happening is simpler. Your attention doesn't know how to stay there yet. This is why motivation fades so quickly. Motivation tries to force attention outward, but attention always returns to identity. You can watch an inspiring video, feel energized, promise yourself change. But if your identity hasn't shifted, your attention will quietly drift back to what it knows. Back to the same thoughts, the same interpretations, the same emotional responses. That's why willpower feels exhausting. You're fighting your own conditioning. And here's the critical part. Attention doesn't just observe reality, it organizes it. What you repeatedly attend to becomes mentally enlarged. What you ignore shrinks. Over time, this creates the illusion that life itself is limited, unfair, repetitive. But what's actually limited is the field of attention you're living inside. You are not stuck in life. You're stuck in a loop of perception. A loop reinforced by years of unconscious attention. This is why awareness is disruptive. The moment you start observing where your attention goes, something strange happens. You realize how little of it is intentional, how often it's pulled by old emotions, old stories, old self-images. You begin to notice that your reactions are predictable, your worries are repetitive, your expectations are familiar, and that realization creates space, not freedom yet, but distance. You stop being completely fused with the patterns. You start to see them instead of being them. And this is where the shift begins. Not by forcing new thoughts, not by pretending everything is fine, but by noticing with honesty where your attention lives. Because wherever your attention rests consistently, your life will follow. And until attention changes, nothing else truly does. In the next block, we'll look at why people keep waiting for the right time and how the future becomes a psychological trap rather than a solution. Because the illusion of someday is one of the most powerful ways identity protects itself. At some point, the problem stops being what happens to you. It becomes who you think you are. This is where most people get stuck without realizing it. Not stuck in circumstances, not stuck in trauma, not stuck in the past, stuck in identification. Psychologically, identification is when you confuse awareness with the role it's observing. You stop saying, "I experience fear," and you start saying, "I am an anxious person." You stop saying, "I'm going through a difficult phase," and you start saying, "This is just how my life is." You stop noticing thoughts, and you start believing them. And the moment that happens, repetition begins, because the mind is loyal. Once it identifies with a version of you, it works tirelessly to maintain consistency, not happiness. Consistency. The brain is not designed to make you fulfilled. It is designed to keep your identity intact. That's why people unconsciously sabotage change. A new opportunity appears, but it doesn't match the internal story. So it feels off, risky, uncomfortable. A healthier version of life shows up, but the self-image hasn't caught up. So it feels unfamiliar, unreal, temporary. And the mind quietly pulls you back to what feels like you. This is why people repeat patterns they consciously hate: the toxic relationship, the financial stress, the emotional numbness, the sense of being overlooked, not because they want it, but because it matches their internal definition of self. The hidden force behind repetition is not fate, it's identity. You don't get what you want, you get what you are identified with. From a psychological perspective, this is known as self-concept reinforcement. From an experiential perspective, it feels like life is happening to you. But here's the unsettling truth. Nothing outside of you has more power than the identity you silently protect. And most identities were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed from childhood labels, from early failures, from comparisons, from moments of shame that were never processed. At some point, an event happened, and instead of saying, "That hurt," you said, "That's who I am now." And the mind built a structure around it. Thoughts started orbiting that identity. Emotions began reinforcing it. Choices aligned with it. Over time, it solidified, not because it was true, but because it was repeated. This is why awareness is dangerous to the false self. Because awareness doesn't argue, it observes, and observation creates distance. The moment you notice, "I'm aware of this thought," you're no longer fully identified with it. The moment you notice this feeling arises and passes, it stops defining you. And that's when the structure begins to crack, not violently, quietly. But the ego doesn't like this, because the ego is not evil, it's just terrified of disappearance. It survives by being someone, even if that someone is exhausted, even if that someone is unhappy, even if that someone is stuck. Being miserable but familiar feels safer than being unknown. So the ego whispers, "This is just how you are. You've always been like this. Change isn't realistic for you." And if you believe those thoughts, the loop continues. But if you notice them, something shifts. Awareness creates a gap. And in that gap, there is choice, not forced action, not positive thinking, not becoming someone else overnight, just space. Space between the observer and the identity, and space is where transformation begins, because you cannot change what you believe you are, but you can change what you stop identifying with. This is the paradox. You don't need to create a new self. You need to loosen your grip on the old one. When identification weakens, patterns lose their grip, repetition slows, reactivity softens, life feels less mechanical. Not because the world changed, but because you're no longer trapped inside the same internal character. And once that happens, life stops repeating itself automatically. It starts responding. But this brings a deeper question. If you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your past roles, then who is actually living this life? That's where we go next. When identification loosens, something unusual happens. You don't become euphoric. You don't suddenly feel powerful. You don't figure life out. What you feel is distance. Distance between you and your reactions, between you and the stories your mind keeps telling, between you and the patterns that once felt inevitable. And in that distance, a quiet presence becomes noticeable, not as a thought, not as an emotion, but as the one who notices both. This is the observer, the part of you that has been here through every version of yourself. The same awareness at 5 years old, at 15, at 30, at this exact moment. Everything else changed. Your beliefs changed. Your fears changed. Your desires changed. Your identity shifted again and again. But the one noticing never did. Psychologically, this is not mystical, it's fundamental. Awareness is stable. Content is not. Thoughts arise and dissolve. Emotions surge and fade. Roles appear and disappear. Yet something remains constant. And here's what most people miss. Patterns don't repeat because of external circumstances. They repeat because the observer remains fused with the content. When awareness forgets itself, it becomes trapped inside what it observes. It starts thinking, I am this thought. I am this emotion. I am this story. And the moment that happens, the pattern gains continuity. But when awareness remembers itself, even slightly, the grip weakens. You begin to notice reactions without being consumed by them. You feel emotions without drowning inside them. You watch old habits activate without automatically obeying them. This doesn't make life easier instantly. In fact, at first, it can feel unsettling because the observer has no script. It doesn't tell you who to be. It doesn't define success. It doesn't promise comfort. It simply sees. And seeing removes the illusion of inevitability. This is why many people unconsciously avoid awareness, because awareness removes excuses. If you're fully identified, you can say, this is just my personality, this is my past, this is my nature. But when you're observing, you see something uncomfortable. You see choice, not the loud, dramatic kind, the subtle kind, the moment where you could react and don't, the moment where you could repeat and pause, the moment where you notice the urge without acting on it. And that pause changes everything, because patterns require unconscious momentum. They survive on speed, on habit, on automatic reactions. Awareness slows things down. It introduces friction, and friction interrupts repetition. This is why transformation doesn't begin with changing behavior. It begins with changing relationship, not changing what happens, but changing how tightly you identify with it. The observer doesn't need to fight the mind. It doesn't need to control thoughts. It doesn't need to suppress emotions. It simply refuses to disappear into them. And over time, something remarkable happens. Patterns that once felt permanent begin to weaken, not through effort, but through lack of identification. Like a fire losing oxygen, the mind still produces old thoughts. The body still feels old emotions, but they no longer define reality. They pass, and the observer remains. This is the hidden force behind real change, not motivation, not discipline, not willpower. Awareness, staying present long enough for identity to loosen, and when identity loosens, life reorganizes itself, not magically, naturally. Because when you are no longer trapped in an outdated self-image, your choices change without force. Your attention shifts. Your tolerance for what no longer fits disappears. Your direction becomes clearer, even if the destination isn't. And that leads to the final movement, not a dramatic transformation, not a bold declaration, but a quiet decision, the kind that changes everything without announcing itself. That's where we go next. At some point, the question changes. It's no longer, how do I fix my life? Or, how do I escape these patterns? It becomes quieter. How do I stop abandoning myself? Because that's what identification really is. A slow, invisible form of self-abandonment. You leave the observer. You move into the story. And you begin living as a reaction instead of a presence. Returning to yourself is not an event. It's not a breakthrough moment. It's not something others notice. It's a decision you make repeatedly, often without certainty. The decision to stay with awareness, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the mind demands an explanation, even when old identities try to pull you back. This return doesn't feel heroic. It feels ordinary. You notice an emotion rising, and you don't become it. You notice a thought repeating, and you don't follow it. You notice a familiar impulse, and you let it pass. Nothing dramatic happens, and yet something fundamental shifts. You stop feeding the old patterns with attention. You stop reinforcing the same internal roles. You stop mistaking noise for truth. This is why real change is often invisible from the outside. Your life may look the same for a while. Your circumstances may not immediately change. Others may not understand what's different, but inside, something has reorganized. You are no longer living from the surface of yourself. You're living from the center. From here, action becomes cleaner, not rushed, not desperate, not driven by fear of becoming someone again. You act because it's aligned, not because you're escaping discomfort. And this alignment doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from identification dissolving. The more you return to awareness, the less power the old self has. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped believing it was you. And eventually, the repetition breaks. Not all at once, not perfectly, but unmistakably. You notice that situations feel different, that reactions lose intensity, that certain cycles simply don't restart. That's when you realize something important. You were never stuck. You were never broken. You were never missing anything. You were simply identified, and identification can end, not through force, not through effort, but through recognition. This recognition doesn't ask you to become someone new. It asks you to stop mistaking yourself for something you were never meant to be. And once that happens, life doesn't suddenly become easy, but it becomes honest, clear, and quietly yours. No announcement, no transformation montage, just presence, choosing itself again. And that is enough.